Hey there guys, what's up? Ragtter here, welcoming you to the Tournament Report. This is where I go into Pokemon tournaments and I see how well I can do. So I'm using my Raikou deck for this particular tournament, and I'm going to get my Tails Never Fails coin flip, and I'm going to decide to go first to try and get some early momentum my way. Now, I get a pretty decent hand here. We got two Manectric EX. I almost called it Mega Manectric. And I get a couple supporter cards and an Ultra Ball. That's the big thing. The Ultra Ball's going to let me get pretty much whatever I want right away. Now my opponent, not going to get a basic Pokemon, so he's going to have to redraw, which is really bad for him, because that's going to give me a free card draw. And I get another Lysander, and another Ultra Ball from my regular draw, and at this point, I've got some stuff to work with, but my hand feels a bit empty at this point. And I decide I'm going to toss the two Lysanders in the end, because I haven't drawn either of my Versus Seekers. I don't know if they're prized or not yet, but I decide to go looking for Remoraid with my Ultra Ball because I've got Octillery in my hand, and Octillery is one of the main draw engines I use in this particular deck. Then, just to clear out a little deck space and get a little hand space, and thin my deck a little more, I'm going to use Giovanni's Scheme. I'm going to draw 5 cards into my hand. Then I'm going to use the Professor's Letter to go looking for these two energies. Going to slap one onto Manectric EX. And, because Mega Manectric lets me get energy from the discard pile, I can use the other one, along with the Judge I don't plan on using, to go and look for Raikou, and slap a Raikou down onto the bench. And now I've got my full arsenal of Pokemon that I want. Right? This is literally the most optimum scenario for starting out with this deck. Could use a little more energy in the discard pile. Could maybe do with like a supporter card in hand, but I'm about to be able to evolve Octillery, and the only thing I'm really missing is the Spirit Link for Mega Manectric EX. So my opponent could have played down Froakie, and going to use his Dive Ball to go looking for another Froakie. And I'm not really sure what my opponent's strategy here is at this point, but seeing Froakie, it gives me the idea of Greninja Break. So my opponent gonna retreat the Remoraid out, gonna bring Froakie up to the front, clearly not willing to sacrifice that potential Octillery. I'm gonna evolve my Octillery, and since I've got both my Mega Manectric EX in hand, I'm just gonna use Abyssal Hand to draw 3 cards. That's gonna give me the energy that I want, and since I'm not really under any pressure of any kind, and I know I can KO pretty much all of his Pokemon with my Turbo Bolt, actually I can KO all of the Pokemon on his side of the bench with my Turbo Bolt, I'm just going to Mega Evolve. I lose nothing for it besides a turn of attacking, but what I'm going to get for it in return is much better. So my opponent going to use Professor Sycamore to toss what is clearly a very unfavorable hand. Going to get an energy onto Froakie, and then going to search for the Trainer's Mill. Not going to find anything. I check out Froakie, I find out that it's a paralyzing Pokemon, and I'm like, please no. And of course, we get paralyzed. So that's just the way the cards go, and I'm going to play down another Raikou. This is like my safety net Raikou. If anything happens to the other one while it's on the bench, like if it gets Lysandered or something, this is the Pokemon I want. So here's a neat little trick for you. I'm going to use my switch to put Mega Manectric back onto my bench, and then I'm going to retreat out of Manectric EX to bring Mega Manectric EX back to the front. That is such a tongueful to say. So, my Abyssal Hand's going to yield me some pretty good cards, and I'm going to take a look at my discard pile to see what kind of supporters I can get. I decide nothing's really worth going for right now, so I'm going to hang on to my Versus Seeker. I'm just going to go for the Turbo Bolt, grab 2 Electric Energy from my discard, slap them onto one of my Raikou, and I'm going to grab a prize, which is another Electric type energy. So my opponent going to throw Froakie out onto the killing fields once again. Mega Manectric EX is hungry, and it desires frogs. My opponent gonna get some energy back, so didn't really lose much with that investment, but I am ahead on prize cards now. Gonna go with the Versus Seeker, find Professor Sycamore in his discard pile, and he's gonna use that to recycle another unfavorable hand, and there's where I see the Greninja Break, and I'm like, okay. Alright, I see you, big buddy, I see you. Greninja Break is pretty interesting, but my opponent just tossed... I'm not sure if that was his only copy, but it might have been his only copy. Just tossed it away. Now going to use Dive Balls. He's searching through his deck right now, and instead of finding a Greninja, he finds a Froakie, so I can only assume he's got a Greninja in his hand at this point. So he plays the Froakie out, and he's going to use this really cool attack Frogadier has, where he goes into his deck and he can just play Frogadier without having to evolve Froakie. That's awesome. I love that card so much. So, looking at my hand, I'm kind of spoiled for choice. I'm going to slap a Last Energy onto Raikou, so now even if something happens to Mega Man EX, Raikou can attack on its own. I'm going to use my Trainer's Mail, and it turns out my next 4 cards were all Trainer cards. And I'm going to decide to take the Muscle Band because I don't really need the others at this point in time. We're going to put that onto Raikou, and now I've got to think like, alright, I could probably thin my deck a little bit, and I can definitely get rid of some extraneous cards in my hand. But part of the thing in Pokemon trading card game is while you do want to be using lots of cards from your hand, you also have to keep up appearances. So I'm debating, like, do I want to save these cards and maybe look like I've got more options? But seeing how set up I am on the board, I do decide that I'm just going to go looking for a card from my deck. I can't even play this. I'm just literally taking it to thin my deck a little bit so I can get a little more with my Abyssal hand. And I draw some really neat supporter cards that aren't really helping me right now. But, if nothing else, I have card draw, and Psychic's Third Eye is very neat. Psychic's Third Eye will let me look at my opponent's hand, and then discard cards from my hand, and then draw to replace them. And seeing that I'm not really hurting for options right now, like I can attack pretty much however I want, I decide I'm going to go looking at my opponent's hand and draw a few lesser cards. So I saw that Lysander, so my opponent, if they wanted to, could shift up the board however they wanted. Deciding I don't need that Raikou, I don't need Switch, and I don't need the Versus Seeker. I'm going to discard all of those. I'm going to get a second Professor Sycamore and Manectric EX. So this is like the optimum of optimum situations. My opponent has no energy on his side. I have all of the energy that Raikou and Mega Manectric EX need to attack. I'm ahead on prizes, I have card draw, I am sitting pretty. Make no mistake, I am 100% comfortable in this game, and that is a really good feeling to have during a tournament match, because tournament matches can go south so quickly because of the timer. People make bad decisions, or they make hasty ones, or they make really aggressive ones, or you're being aggressive and you don't notice. So my opponent is going to play down a stadium, and I can't remember what this stadium is called. The Silent Lab. There we go. Thank you. Thank you, past me. So, my opponent's going to play down the Silent Lab, and that removes all of the abilities from my Pokemon, which is irritating to say the least. My opponent also finally going to get a Greninja onto the board, and I take a look at those attacks. Those attacks are pretty interesting, but they're not overly threatening. Like, these can help my opponent get into a good position, and he will deal damage. Make no mistake about that. But I deal more damage, and Raikou, actually, if I bring it in, is capable of KOing this Greninja. So my opponent has to tread very carefully. They put a lot of investment into this Greninja, and just like that, I can take it out. So you really have to think about the weight of what you're using. Because this Raikou, it's just a basic Pokemon. It hasn't taken me anything to set up, besides an attack from Mega Manectric EX and a couple energy. But that Greninja took 3 turns of investment, and a Water-type energy. So I'm going to go for Professor Sycamore after I bring Raikou out to the front, and I get a hand full of cards that I don't really want or need. Now, because I can't put a Spirit Link, well, I could put a Spirit Link, but I'm not going to put a Spirit Link onto an already Mega Evolved Pokemon. I'm going to put my Muscle Band onto Mega Manectric EX, just so if he plays more of those Greninjas, Mega Manectric EX can deal with them. I'm going to use the Battle Compressor to remove all of the cards that I currently don't need from my deck, which is the other copy of Battle Compressor, 1 Lightning Energy, and the Mega Manectric Spirit Link, because, you know, that's already in my hand for the only other copy of the card that I have. I'm going to get a Rough Seas, which I'm going to use to remove that annoying Silent Lab. I'm going to heal up Mega Manectric EX, and I'll draw 1 card. Just 1. See, now, here's that thing I was talking about, concealing my hand, making it look like I have more options. I could be playing that Mega Manectric Spirit Link. I could play a Versus Seeker, but I also don't need to right now. I'm in a comfortable position, and having more cards in my hand makes me inherently more intimidating to my opponent. So I've got to keep that sort of wall between me and the person I'm playing against, so it always looks like I have the option of being one step ahead if I want. So my opponent gonna get another Greninja courtesy of Wally. Going to attach energy to the Remoraid, which confused me at first. It felt like a waste of energy. But gonna use Greninja's ability to toss the water type energy, which is going to put a little bit of a hurting onto my Raikou. Then Remoraid goes for its attack, which removes a Stadium card from play. Never knew it had that. Never even paid attention to Remoraid's attacks before. So I've lost my Rough Seas. I slap an energy onto Raikou, and I'm going to be a great big meanie. Since my opponent removed my Stadium, I'm going to remove his Greninja. So I go for Lysander from my discard pile to bring Greninja back to the front. I force a retreat, basically, and I knock out my opponent's last vestige of a powerhouse. So Remoraid is brought out here, and by this point my opponent is pretty crippled. It would take a lot to come back at this point, but they are going to get an additional Greninja onto the board, and he's going to judge. Now that judge actually helps me because, as you could see, my deck was running out of cards. So, too long of a game and I would have lost by default. But I'm going to get some cards that I want, and I have the option of closing the game out with the hand that I currently have. Now check this out. If you thought my play of bringing that Greninja to the front and then KOing it was mean, you haven't seen anything yet. So I put an energy down onto the other Raikou just as an insurance policy. If anything goes awry, I can bring that back. I'm going to shuffle one Lightning Energy, a copy of Mega Manectric EX, and a Manectric EX back into my deck with my Super Rod. Then I'm going to play Delinquent, and if you don't know what Delinquent is, it is a card that discards the current Stadium in play, and if you do that, then your opponent discards 3 cards from his or her hand. And my opponent only had 3 cards from his or her hand, so I basically bullied my opponent into discarding his entire hand, and not wanting to deal with me anymore. My opponent puts up the forfeit, and that was a fun game. I have a lot of respect to my opponent for bowing out when he did, because that is actually some abusive play that I did. So, if you have enjoyed this episode of the Tournament Report, then let me know with a like and a comment down below, and we'll be back tomorrow to see how my future matches went. Until then, thanks for watching, bye-bye!